Brothers and sisters, I come to you today with a word that many of you may not want to hear, but one that you desperately need. It is a word that will challenge the very way you view the world and the way you interact with those around you. It is a word that will expose the lie we have been fed, that you must be nice to everyone at all costs in order to be loved and accepted. But let me ask you, what does it truly mean to be nice? Is being nice simply about saying the right things, doing the right things, smiling when you don't want to smile, and agreeing when you know the truth is something else? Is that kindness? Or is it nothing more than people-pleasing, an empty, superficial gesture that ultimately leads to your own destruction? I want to tell you something very plainly. Stop being nice to everyone. Stop living your life as if the opinions of every person you encounter are your highest priority. Stop bending over backward to earn their approval at the expense of your own soul. Let me know if you'd like any adjustments. We live in a world that constantly tells us that the key to happiness and success is being liked by everyone. It's ingrained in our society, promoted through social media, and reinforced by the expectations of those around us. The idea that we should be nice to everyone, always, is seen as virtuous, as though it's the ultimate goal of a good life. But the truth is, this mindset is deeply flawed and can lead to great harm in our spiritual lives. Being nice is often confused with being good. People believe that if they just conform to what others want, if they just smile and go along with things, then they will be loved and accepted. We've been taught that we should avoid conflict, avoid rocking the boat, and that true harmony comes from simply agreeing with everyone. But this is not the way of Christ. It's not the path he has laid out for us. In fact, the pressure to always be nice can slowly chip away at our integrity and lead us further away from God's will for our lives. Niceness, as it is often understood, is not a fruit of the Spirit. It is not a deep-rooted characteristic of Christ's character. It's often nothing more than a temporary, surface-level strategy to avoid discomfort or rejection. It's an attempt to keep things peaceful at all costs, to avoid conflict or tension. But this approach ultimately does not reflect the true heart of God's love, nor does it reflect the way Jesus lived his life. Jesus was not always nice to the people around him, but he was always loving, always truthful, and always just. When you place more value on pleasing people than you do on living in accordance with your faith, you are setting yourself up for failure. The reality is you cannot please everyone. It is impossible. There will always be people who disagree with you, who misunderstand you, who criticize you, or who try to manipulate you into doing things that don't align with your values. And if you live your life trying to avoid their disapproval, you will never know peace. You will never be free. The deeper issue here is that constantly trying to please others at the expense of your own values and convictions is rooted in fear. Fear of rejection, fear of being alone, fear of being misunderstood. And that fear is exactly what the enemy wants to use to control your life. He wants to keep you in a state of perpetual insecurity, where you are constantly second-guessing yourself, worried about what others think of you. And as long as you live in that fear, you will be enslaved to the opinions of people rather than the truth of God's word. True kindness is not about being liked or avoiding conflict. It is about standing firm in what is right, no matter the consequences. True kindness is about loving others in a way that reflects God's heart, and sometimes that means saying hard things, things that people won't like to hear. Sometimes it means setting boundaries, telling someone that their actions are not acceptable, or refusing to go along with something that you know is wrong. True kindness requires strength, courage, and conviction, not simply a desire to be liked. When we value being nice over being truthful, we are not serving God, but rather we are serving ourselves. We are trying to protect our own comfort and avoid the discomfort that comes with speaking the truth or standing up for what's right. But the truth of the matter is there is no real peace in compromise. There is no lasting joy in pleasing everyone around you. The peace that comes from God is not the absence of conflict. It is the peace that comes from knowing that you are living according to His will, no matter what others think or how they respond. Living to please everyone is a dangerous game to play because it puts you at the mercy of the world's shifting standards. People's opinions are constantly changing. What one person thinks is acceptable today might be completely different tomorrow. And if you are constantly trying to keep up with those ever-changing expectations, you will find yourself living in confusion and instability. You will never know who you truly are or what you truly believe. Instead of being caught up in the cycle of people-pleasing, we are called to live lives of integrity and authenticity rooted in God's truth. Your worth and your identity should be grounded in who you are in Christ, not in the approval of others. The approval of man is fleeting, unreliable, and often misleading. But the approval of God is eternal, steadfast, and the only approval that truly matters. To live a life of true freedom, you must stop being so concerned with what others think. You must learn to speak the truth in love, even when it's uncomfortable. You must be willing to set boundaries, to say no when necessary, and to stop compromising your beliefs just to make others happy. The only way to truly live out your faith is to stop letting the fear of disapproval control your actions. Instead, live with boldness and courage, trusting that God will be with you every step of the way, even if it means facing rejection or conflict. It is better to be rejected by men and accepted by God than to gain the approval of the world and lose your soul. In conclusion, being nice to everyone is not a virtuous goal. It is a trap that will keep you from living out your true calling in Christ. Stop trying to please everyone. Live to please God, and let His approval be the only one that matters. When you do, you will experience a peace and freedom that the world can never offer, and you will be able to walk in the fullness of the life that God has prepared for you. The idea of being nice to everyone often leads us to believe that kindness means saying yes to everything. We think that true kindness is about accommodating others, agreeing with them, and keeping the peace at all costs. But this kind of thinking is not only misguided, it can also be deeply harmful to our own well-being and spiritual growth. The reality is kindness is not about indiscriminately pleasing people or avoiding discomfort. It's about acting with discernment, knowing when to stand firm and when to show grace. True kindness, as exemplified in the life of Christ, is not simply about being agreeable or avoiding conflict. Christ was not a doormat. He did not bow to the will of others just to avoid tension. Instead, he was firm in his convictions and bold in his truth-telling, even when it offended those around him. He had compassion, but he also had wisdom and knew when to speak hard truths. Being truly kind is about finding that balance, understanding that real love and kindness require discernment. The problem with trying to be nice to everyone is that it often leads us to ignore our own needs, boundaries, and convictions in the pursuit of external peace. When we don't have discernment, we open ourselves up to manipulation, exploitation, and emotional exhaustion. You cannot be everything to everyone. You cannot always say yes without losing yourself in the process. If you do, you will find yourself depleted and resentful, trapped in a cycle of people-pleasing that can never be sustained. You will lose sight of what truly matters and find yourself compromised spiritually and emotionally. Discernment is about knowing when to engage and when to step back. It is about understanding the needs of others without neglecting your own. It is about recognizing that not every situation requires your intervention, and not every person requires your approval. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to allow them to face the consequences of their actions, or to set a boundary that protects your own emotional and spiritual health. There are times when kindness means saying no, It means being willing to confront difficult situations or people, even when it feels uncomfortable. This ability to discern is something that Jesus modeled throughout his ministry. Think about the many times he walked away from crowds or refused to answer questions from those who sought to trap him. In Matthew 15, when the Pharisees came to him with a question about traditions, Jesus didn't simply offer a diplomatic response. Instead, he confronted their hypocrisy with a bold, pointed rebuke. He understood that some conversations and actions required clarity, truth, and courage, not niceness. He wasn't interested in pleasing people for the sake of peace. His concern was for their souls and for revealing God's truth, even when it was difficult. Similarly, in our own lives, we must exercise discernment in our relationships and interactions. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is not to go along with the crowd, but to speak out when something is wrong, to challenge someone when their behavior is harmful, or to say no when we need to protect our own time, energy, or principles. This is especially important in a world that is increasingly self-centered and where many are more interested in having their desires affirmed than in receiving truthful guidance. Being nice without discernment leads to unhealthy relationships. It fosters a culture of enabling bad behavior, where people's actions are never challenged and the truth is never spoken. True kindness means speaking the truth with love and not being afraid to confront difficult issues. Whether it's in friendships, family dynamics, or in our workplaces, there are times when we need to have the courage to say the hard things, even when it means risking a relationship or facing discomfort. That is real kindness. Moreover, discernment allows us to focus our energy on the relationships and situations that truly matter. Not every request or need requires your attention, and not every person is entitled to your time and energy. When you try to be nice to everyone, you spread yourself thin, often overcommitting to things that are not in alignment with your values or purpose. This can leave you feeling worn out, ineffective, and disconnected from your true calling. Jesus taught us the importance of focusing on the right priorities. In Luke 10:38-42, we see the story of Martha and Mary. Martha, busy with serving, was overwhelmed and frustrated because Mary was sitting at Jesus' feet listening to his teaching. Jesus didn't rebuke Mary. Instead, he pointed out that Martha had allowed herself to become distracted with the lesser things. It wasn't wrong for Martha to serve, but she had allowed her desire to please others and to meet every need to take her away from what was truly important. Discernment teaches us to focus on the priorities that align with God's will and purpose for our lives. When you learn to exercise discernment, you will stop living in a reactionary mode, always responding to the demands of others, always trying to please everyone, always worried about what others think. Instead, you will learn to be intentional with your time and energy, using them in ways that honor God and reflect His love in a meaningful way. You will learn when to speak, when to act, and when to step back. You will also learn to protect yourself emotionally and spiritually, understanding that boundaries are not walls to shut others out, but a way to maintain your own health and well-being as you love and serve others. In conclusion, kindness without discernment leads to burnout, compromise, and the inability to stand firm in your convictions. True kindness requires wisdom, knowing when to say yes and when to say no, knowing when to speak the truth and when to be silent, and knowing how to protect your own spiritual health while serving others. This is the kind of kindness that Christ modeled, and it is the kind of kindness we are called to live out in our own lives. When we look around us, it's easy to see that society places a high value on the approval of others, whether it's through the validation of social media, the praise we seek at work, or the accolades we expect from our friends and family. It seems as though our worth is often determined by how others view us. In fact, so much of our identity in today's world can become wrapped up in what others think. However, as Christians, we are called to a different standard. The Bible makes it abundantly clear that our highest aim should not be to seek the approval of people, but to honor and serve God with our lives, regardless of the approval or disapproval of others. The pursuit of the approval of man is an insidious trap that can lead us away from God's will. For am I now seeking the approval of man or of God, or am I trying to please man? If I were still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ, Galatians 1:10. Paul's words are a sharp reminder of the tension that exists between living for the approval of people and living for the glory of God. The apostle is clear: when we seek the approval of people, we are not living as true servants of Christ. Our lives become shaped by the expectations and desires of those around us, and we lose the focus on God's calling. The problem with seeking people's approval is that it places our worth and identity in something that is fleeting, inconsistent, and often misguided. People's opinions can change from one moment to the next. One day they may praise you for your actions, and the next day they may criticize you for the same things. If your worth is based on their approval, you will always be at the mercy of their shifting opinions, never finding true peace or stability. You will find yourself walking a tightrope, trying to balance the expectations of everyone around you, and in the process, you will lose sight of your true calling in Christ. The approval of people often leads to compromise. It leads us to water down the truth, avoid speaking up when we should, or even forsake our convictions just to fit in or avoid confrontation. How many times have we kept silent when we should have spoken out simply because we were afraid of being rejected or judged? How many times have we chosen to agree with others even when we knew that what they were saying or doing was wrong, just to avoid conflict? This kind of compromise, this bending to the will of others, does not bring peace. It brings spiritual bankruptcy. It chips away at our integrity and makes us less effective in our witness for Christ. The approval of man is an idol that demands our allegiance and submission, but it can never satisfy the deepest longings of our hearts. When we seek the approval of others, we are also robbing ourselves of the freedom that comes from living to please God alone. The Bible tells us that if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed, John 8:36. This freedom is not just freedom from sin, but also freedom from the tyranny of people's opinions. When we live to please God, we are liberated from the need to constantly measure up to the expectations of the world. We are free to speak the truth boldly, to stand firm in our convictions, and to live according to the values that God has called us to uphold, regardless of what others may think. Jesus himself is the ultimate example of living for God's approval rather than man's. Think about his life and ministry. Jesus never sought the approval of the Pharisees, the religious leaders, or even the crowds who followed him. In fact, he often spoke words that caused many to turn away. He didn't hesitate to challenge the status quo, even when it angered people. He didn't perform miracles or give teachings to gain popularity. He did it all to glorify his Father in heaven and to fulfill the mission that God had given him. Jesus knew that his ultimate purpose was to obey God, not to please men. And in doing so, he fulfilled the very mission that would lead to our salvation. In our own lives, we must ask ourselves, are we living to please God, or are we living to please others? The truth is, we cannot do both. Jesus said, no one can serve two masters, Matthew chapter 6, verse 24. If we try to live for the approval of both God and man, we will be torn in two directions. We will live in a constant state of inner conflict, never truly satisfied and never fully committed to either one. It's only when we surrender ourselves completely to God's will that we can experience the peace and joy that come from living living for his approval alone. Living for God's approval means that we are free to speak the truth even when it's uncomfortable. It means we can stand firm in our faith even when others mock us or reject us. It means we are willing to confront sin in our own lives and in the lives of others, even if it leads to misunderstanding or conflict. It means we can live authentically without fear of judgment because we know that our worth is secure in Christ. Ultimately, seeking God's approval is the only thing that will bring true peace. When we live for the glory of God, we are free from the need to prove ourselves to anyone else. We are free to be who God created us to be, to fulfill the purpose he has called us to, and to trust that his approval is all that matters. It's a freedom that the world cannot offer, and one that we must continually pursue. When we live with this mindset, we can truly say with Paul, "For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain." Philippians 1:21, our life is no longer about pleasing others. It's about pleasing God and living for his glory. In conclusion, the approval of man is fleeting, unreliable, and ultimately unfulfilling. We are called to live for God's approval alone, to seek his glory above all else, and to trust that when we do, he will honor our faithfulness. May we always remember that we are fearfully and wonderfully made, and our worth is secure in the eyes of our Creator, not in the fleeting praise of the world. Let us live for God's approval, and let his approval be enough. In a world that increasingly encourages self-sacrifice for the sake of others, it's easy to forget the importance of self-respect and setting boundaries. We are often told that true love involves giving everything of ourselves without expecting anything in return. While selflessness is a virtue, there is a danger in neglecting our own emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being. Respecting yourself and establishing healthy boundaries is not selfishness. It's necessary for a life that is both fulfilling and sustainable. Without these boundaries, we risk becoming overwhelmed, resentful, and ineffective in our relationships and our service to God. Self-respect is foundational to living a healthy, productive life. It is not about self-obsession or pride, but about recognizing our intrinsic worth as individuals created in the image of God. When we fail to respect ourselves, we allow others to define our value. We place ourselves at the mercy of external validation, and that will always lead to disappointment and disillusionment. When you honor yourself and acknowledge your own dignity, you are better able to serve others because you do not rely on them for your sense of worth. In relationships, whether with family, friends, co-workers, or even strangers, boundaries are essential for maintaining mental and emotional health. Without boundaries, we allow others to impose their needs, desires, and expectations upon us without regard for our own limitations. This can quickly lead to burnout, emotional exhaustion, and resentment. Healthy boundaries are not walls that keep people out. They are protective measures that ensure we remain strong and resilient while still offering love and care. They allow us to say no when we need to protect our time and to preserve our energy so that we can give freely without feeling depleted or manipulated. Establishing boundaries means learning to say no when necessary. It means understanding that you are not obligated to please everyone or to meet every demand placed upon you. We are often taught that being constantly available and accommodating is the key to maintaining good relationships. However, this mindset can lead to deep dissatisfaction. If you are always putting the needs of others ahead of your own, without regard for your own emotional or physical health, you will eventually find yourself unable to sustain the level of giving that is required. True kindness requires knowing when to set limits so that you can offer your best without being overwhelmed. Jesus himself demonstrated the importance of boundaries. Throughout his ministry, he would often withdraw from the crowds to pray and recharge. He did not allow the constant demands of people to overtake his time with his Father. In Mark 1:35 it says, "Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed." Jesus knew the importance of taking time for himself to be in communion with God, to refresh his spirit, and to set aside time for the work he was called to do. If Jesus, who was fully God and fully man, needed to take moments to rest and recharge, how much more do we? When we refuse to set boundaries and continually sacrifice our time, energy, and emotional resources, we are doing a disservice to both ourselves and to those we serve. The people around us need us to be healthy, strong, and emotionally available. If we are constantly drained and burned out, we will not be able to serve them effectively. Self-respect requires understanding that we cannot pour from an empty cup. It requires recognizing that our own emotional and spiritual health must come first so that we can give to others from a place of strength rather than depletion. Boundaries are not just about saying no to others. They are also about saying yes to ourselves. Saying yes to ourselves means prioritizing our own well-being and growth. It means setting aside time for rest, pursuing our own passions and interests, and taking care of our physical, mental, and emotional health. When we fail to do this, we can easily become resentful of others, feeling as though they are taking advantage of us, even if they aren't. Resentment arises when we continually ignore our own needs for the sake of others. Establishing boundaries helps prevent this, allowing us to give without bitterness. Another aspect of self-respect and boundary setting is understanding that we are not responsible for the happiness or well-being of others. While we are called to love and serve others, we are not their saviors. It is not our job to fix everyone's problems or to bear the weight of their emotions. People must take responsibility for their own lives, choices, and emotions. We are called to be a support, to offer love and guidance, but we cannot carry the burden of their decisions or try to solve every problem. By setting healthy boundaries, we protect ourselves from becoming enmeshed in others' issues and can focus on what God has called us to do. Establishing boundaries also requires discernment, as not all situations require the same level of involvement. There will be times when it is right to go the extra mile for someone, but there will also be times when it is appropriate to say no or to step back. Discernment is about knowing the difference between the two and acting accordingly. It requires wisdom and an understanding of when your involvement is truly necessary and when it may be harmful to both you and the other person. It is about recognizing that you are not called to meet every need, but rather to meet the needs that God has placed in front of you. Ultimately, setting boundaries is an act of self-love, but it is also an act of love for others. When we honor ourselves by setting healthy boundaries, we are better able to love others well. We can give from a place of abundance rather than from a place of scarcity. We can offer grace and compassion without losing ourselves in the process. Setting boundaries helps us live a life of balance, where we honor both our relationship with God and our relationships with others, without sacrificing our own well-being. In conclusion, respecting yourself and establishing boundaries is not a sign of selfishness or pride, but a necessary step in living a healthy and fulfilling life. When we fail to set boundaries, we risk losing ourselves in the process of trying to please others. Boundaries allow us to give freely and love others well without becoming overwhelmed or resentful. May we learn to honor ourselves, to respect our own needs, and to establish the boundaries necessary for a life of peace, joy, and service to others. Living in a world that places such a high premium on the approval of others often leads us to prioritize superficial relationships over meaningful connections. We become obsessed with being liked and accepted by everyone, and in doing so we forget the value of cultivating authentic relationships based on truth, integrity, and mutual respect. When we focus on pleasing everyone, we lose the ability to develop deep, genuine friendships that reflect the heart of God. These relationships, founded on honesty and shared values, are the ones that truly nurture our souls and strengthen our walk with Christ. One of the greatest dangers of trying to please everyone is that it leads to inauthenticity. We become so concerned with how others perceive us that we lose touch with who we truly are. Instead of living from a place of authenticity, we begin to wear masks, presenting a version of ourselves that we think others will accept or admire. This constant need for approval can result in a distorted sense of identity as we shift and mold ourselves to fit the expectations of those around us. But the truth is, when we live to please others, we cannot be true to ourselves. We are not free to live out the unique calling and purpose that God has designed for us. Authentic relationships, on the other hand, are built on truth and transparency. These relationships are not based on what we can do for others or how well we can meet their expectations, but on a deep connection that honors each person's individuality. In such relationships, we are free to be ourselves, to share our struggles, to speak the truth, and to encourage one another towards spiritual growth. Authenticity allows us to love others genuinely without pretending to be someone we are not. And in turn, it allows others to love us for who we truly are, not for the mask we wear to gain their approval. The pressure to please everyone can also prevent us from speaking the truth, especially when it involves confronting sin or addressing uncomfortable situations. We may avoid difficult conversations because we fear the conflict that could arise or the rejection that might follow. However, true love and friendship are not about avoiding discomfort, but about speaking the truth in love. Ephesians 4:15. True friends and genuine relationships are built on mutual trust and accountability, and sometimes that means having hard conversations. Sometimes it means saying things that might not be popular, but are necessary for the other person's spiritual well-being. In the book of Proverbs, we are told that faithful are the wounds of a friend, but deceitful are the kisses of an enemy. Proverbs 27:6. This wisdom reminds us that a true friend is not afraid to speak the truth, even when it's painful. If we are only concerned with pleasing others and avoiding difficult conversations, we risk becoming more like the deceitful kisses of an enemy, offering superficial kindness rather than genuine love. True friendship, as modeled by Christ, involves offering correction when necessary, encouraging growth, and walking alongside one another through both the joys and the struggles of life. Moreover, focusing on pleasing everyone can prevent us from forming the kinds of deep, transformative relationships that God desires for us. Authentic relationships are those that sharpen us, challenge us, and encourage us in our faith. Proverbs 27:17 tells us, "As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another." This sharpening process, though at times uncomfortable, is vital for our growth as individuals and as followers of Christ. However, these kinds of relationships are impossible to cultivate if we are too focused on being liked by everyone or avoiding conflict. True friends will not always agree with you or affirm everything you say or do, but they will challenge you to grow, to become more like Christ, and to live out your calling with integrity and courage. When we prioritize pleasing everyone, we also risk neglecting the relationships that truly matter, those that are based on shared values and a commitment to pursuing God together. It is easy to get caught up in superficial friendships or relationships that are based solely on mutual